So good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is John Marion. I know some of you, but not all of you. And I'm from Common Cause, Rhode Island. And we're super happy you're here today, spending your Thursday night with us. I'm supposed to start with an announcement. There's on the podium, it says, please announce where the locations of the emergency exits are. So I believe there and over here. Okay. There's also restrooms outside. If you go past the registration desk, you'll run into the restrooms and there's a water fountain. So feel free to use that. So I just want to start out with a couple of thank yous, as I normally do when we have events. The main thank you here is the Rhode Island School Design is very generous to provide us with the auditorium to do this every year. Particularly, there's a woman, she's not here, but I'll thank her anyway. Babette Alina, who runs their government relations office, is responsible for letting us be here. And also, many of you met Sam Ogandari, our assistant director, and Galen Auer, our outreach coordinator, who are at the registration table. So thank you to them. I want to thank the panelists, and I'll introduce them in a second, but they're taking time out of their evenings, away from their families, and other obligations to share their knowledge and insights. And I think you're going to find we put together a really good panel that has a lot of deep institutional knowledge about the topic. This series we call Demystifying Democracy. So we started this about 4 years ago, and I'm now starting to call it basically what it is, which is it's adult civic education, right? It's a chance for adults to come together and learn from experts about topics, and we focus on particularly state and local government in Rhode Island, and learn in depth about some of those topics, but not, not the sort of Schoolhouse Rock version, because you could read a book and learn the Schoolhouse Rock version. But here we want to kind of get the realistic version of how our democracy works and sometimes doesn't in the Ocean State. So we have 2 more panels coming up this year. We run kind of a cycle of 3 every year. The next one's on March 14th, and you actually got a handout. If you didn't, you can get it on your way out with all the events for the rest of the year. And that one is on the census, which we're doing a lot of work on. In the third in the series, we're going to try a new topic, which is about local government, because we get a lot of questions at the office about like municipal government. And so we're going to try to do something about how to get involved in municipal government, which will be interesting because we've never tackled that topic before. So hopefully you can come to those. We do videotape these and put them all online. And Steve will probably have this online as well, but we'll put them on our website. We built a dedicated website at demystifyingdemocracy.org. In addition to the videos, we have, and you should have all gotten, and if you didn't, we'll get you one on your way out, this toolkit that we put together. And the idea here is that people are going to reference a lot of terminology or facts about sort of how the State House works, and we try to put it into a toolkit. It has 5 parts. It has a checklist of things you want to do if you're going to go up there to either talk to your legislator or testify. A glossary of some of the quirky terminology, sort of the timeline, the yearly timeline and the daily timeline, a map of where the committee rooms are. So if somebody says, I'm House Corporations Committee, you can find it on here. And interestingly, like this is the only map. You go to the State House, they don't give you a map. So I've actually seen people at the State House, employees using our map because we have one. And then some information about the websites you can use to track bills, find bills, and track bills. I also just really briefly want to point out that the Secretary of State's office does a lot of similar resources. So when you do go to the State House, if you haven't been, make sure you go into the State Library. Not only is it the most beautiful room in the State House, but they actually have like a Facebook of all the legislators, and you can pick one up, and it will say what committees they're on and how to contact them. So if you're going up there to talk to legislators and you don't know what they look like, or you can pick that up in the State Library, and they even have a seating chart so you can find out where they sit on the floor. So in the last piece of paper I'll shill for is the Secretary of State every 2 years puts out an owner's manual, and it's aptly named because it has all this information about all the elected officials, state and local. So this gets into every town council, every state board, as well as the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. So I highly recommend. These are free. You just pick it up at the state library. So there's my sales pitch for the night. Before we get started, I will point out two other things. One is in our packet, we talk a little bit about our work more generally, and then specifically this year. So I'm not going to preach to you about our agenda, but we're working on independent redistricting. And so there's a handout about that, and we can talk about that offline if you're interested. But we're here to kind of talk about how to get involved regardless of what issue you're interested in, but if you're interested in our democracy issues, that's important. So, all that. I want to now introduce our panelists, who we try to do kind of a mix of people who have different perspectives on the legislative process. This is the combination of two different events we used to do separately, one about how a bill becomes a law and a separate one about how to testify, but we thought we'd combine the two. And so we have people who have experiences both legislatively as well as advocates, and Representative Carson, somebody who's worn both hats. So I'll start with Representative Lauren Carson at the far end. She's serving her third term as state representative from Newport in House District 75. She served on the House Oversight Committee, Municipal Government Committee, and Small Business Committees. Her priorities include climate and the environment, government transparency, and civic participation, very apt for tonight. She holds master's degrees in business administration from URI, as well as a master's degree Masters of Art in History from the University of Rhode Island. And she has extensive experience in the public and nonprofit community. She's worked, currently works for the Eastern Rhode Island Conservation District, where she serves as the founding member of the RI Green Infrastructure Coalition. She's also worked for Clean Water Action in New Jersey, as well as a national staff, and most recently in Rhode Island. Next, we have in the middle Representative Catherine Kazarian. After graduating from Barnard College at Columbia University in 2012 with a major in urban studies and economics, Representative Kazarian was inspired to run for office by President Barack Obama after he delivered her commencement address. She was first elected in November 2012 and proudly serves the residents of East Providence in District 63. She serves as a member of the House Committee on Corporations and has served on the committees on municipal government, environment and natural resources, and rules, which is an important but a stealthy committee. During her time as a state representative, she's co-sponsored successful legislation to legalize same-sex marriage and protect women's reproductive privacy. As the great-granddaughter of survivors of the Armenian genocide, she's most proud to have sponsored successful legislation to mandate that all students in Rhode Island schools be taught about the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, and other genocides that happened in the 20th century. Outside of her work at the State House, she's an avid runner and works as a client success manager at Virgin Pulse. And finally, closest to me is Jed Thorpe of Save the Bay. Jed serves as the advocacy coordinator at Save the Bay and is a registered lobbyist on their behalf, where he works to advance the mission to improve and protect Narragansett Bay. He's spent the better part of 20 years as community organizer, advocate, and lobbyist, working on a variety of environmental issues for grassroots organizations, including Ohio Citizen Action, Clean Water Action, and the Sierra Club. An Ohioan by birth, is that correct, Ohioan?
That's how we say it.
And a political scientist by training. Jed moved to Rhode Island 6 years ago after spending 4 years as membership director at Rhode Island Public Radio, then the Public's Radio. So you recognize his voice from asking you for money. He returned to his environmental advocacy roots at Save the Bay. Proud father of a beautiful 4-year-old daughter. I added the beautiful in there myself. who he hopes someday in the distant future will succeed Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. Okay, so there's the long introductions, but worthy introductions. So I was going to start out by asking if you had any sort of opening comments you wanted to give, and then we're going to kind of launch into some questions and answers. And after we get through some of the topics, we'll take your questions and put them to the panel. So do you have any opening thoughts you want to share?
Just want to say thank you to everybody for coming tonight. I hope we're able to answer all of your questions. I think I just speak on behalf of all of us, so we're just happy to have you here. Happy that you're interested.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So we'll launch right into the topic at hand. Okay. So I'm going to start with Representative Carson. Assuming, and I know there are some people in the audience, there are varying degrees of knowledge about how sort of the legislative process works. Can you explain the broad outlines about what the General Assembly is, how many legislators there are, how long you serve,
Sure.
and so forth?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me tonight. Really, I'm happy to do this. When I'm asked that question, I always say that there's a cycle to our work in the Assembly. We have, just the background is that we have 75 House members. I represent District 75, so I'm the last one. And then we have 38 members in the Senate, so that's 113 altogether. And there's a cycle of activities. We meet from January to June. We meet 3 nights a week, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. We start at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We spend about the first 6 weeks of the session right now drafting and writing legislation, which is sort of like writing term papers. We do a lot of work. We meet with constituents. We meet with the legal staff at the State House that can do research for us, research policy questions. So say, for example, a constituent comes to me and they want me to introduce a bill on historic cemeteries, which I'm doing, as a matter of fact. I'll meet with the attorneys a couple of times. They'll dig up for me existing statutes that are in Rhode Island. They'll do some comparative work for me in other states. And then we begin the process of actually drafting bills and introducing them. And so we're all busy right now, maybe drafting 2, 4, 6, maybe 10 or 12 bills. And it's a give and take, back and forth with the legal staff, back and forth with stakeholders. They draft a bill, I show it to my constituent, I go back, I make the changes. It's sort of like writing term papers. That's how I kind of relate it. And so then the bills are ready to be introduced. And now each house, each chamber has rules. Katie sits on the Rules Committee. And so we used to sit on Rules Committee. And so we excuse me, in the House, we have different rules than the Senate. And so we can introduce bills till around the middle of February. And so we're very busy right now, if you saw us on TV or come to the chamber, getting co-sponsors, introducing bills. The Speaker will ask for new business, and we're putting those bills in. And so if you go to that portion of the website that John made reference to, and you can look at under legislation on the Ryland website, that's the Rhode Island Legislative Network, you can look for daily introductions, and all the bills will be listed there that are introduced day after day. So we don't have many hearings at this time of year. We usually have a very short session because we're not really hearing, there's not much hearing activity on bills or voting on bills. Unless, of course, we have some business that we've carried over from a previous year, which is what's happened this year. So, for example, we've already had hearings this week on some gun bills as well as on the medical marijuana issues because they sort of got carried over from the last session. It's somewhat unusual that we dig right into bills that have that kind of heavy content, but the leaders of both chambers said that they wanted to take these bills up right away. So then we have a break for a week, and then we move into the hearing cycle. So we spend between March 1st all through the end of the session doing committee hearings. We go to our respective committees where bills are heard, and right around April, the bills start coming out of committee, and they start coming to the floor. So then our calendar starts to change. There's little to no bill introduction. There could be some by exception, and there's a lot of voting that begins to take place. And our calendar fills up with the bills that have been approved by the committees, and we have to vote on them. And then we start working a lot later into the evening. As we approach the end of the session, say around Memorial Day through the end of June, we become very busy. That's when we're largely voting on bills, and we're voting on the budget, and our calendar, our daily calendar, goes from 10 bills a day to maybe 30 bills a day, to maybe 40 bills a day. And we spend most of that time, that 3 to 6 weeks, just voting on bills and voting on the budget. When we vote on the budget, it's a one singular day that we only vote on the budget. And that takes us a good long time to get that done. And then we end the session somewhere between the 20th and the 30th of June. Not all the bills pass. Some do, some don't. And then we're basically out of session from approximately July 1st through the first of the year. Our first session is the first Tuesday in January. And our work still continues in the summer. I mean, we still have obligations to serve our constituents. We're still meeting with folks to determine our priorities for the next year. We're attending activities in the district where our work is required. And also there's administrative work that we have to do. And I'll just close by giving this one example. In the city of Newport, we all know the Newport Bridge, and the Newport Bridge ramps are being realigned. So you'll hear a lot more about that in the years ahead. And that's been a very big issue in my district, how we're going to possibly realign the bridge. So that's a non-legislative activity that I have to be involved in, because realigning the ramps of the Newport Bridge is going to have generational impact on the city. So there are administrative functions that we have to do between, the 1st of July and, say, the end of the year. So again, it goes cyclical. And I think that's the easiest way to really understand how it works.
Yeah, and for any parents, the breaks they take are the school vacation breaks.
Yes,
So
they
it's
are.
the February school vacation break, and then the April school vacation break, and sort of it's almost like trimesters. That
Yes, it
first
is.
trimester,
It is.
submit the bills, second trimester, hear the bills, third trimester, vote on the bills. But you did use a term, I'm gonna ask you to clarify, because I guess the point of this is to cut through the jargon.
Sure.
So when you said calendar, so when I think calendar, I think, oh yeah, that pictures in January, February. What do you mean by calendar?
We have a specific set agenda in the House. So the first thing we do is we say a prayer, which I will tell you off the record I don't agree with, but they want to pray, so we say some nice thing. And then we do the Pledge of Allegiance. Then we pass our minutes from the previous session and send them over to the Secretary of State. Then we do the calendar. We do new introductions. If there's new business, that would be legislation that I'm prepared to introduce. The Speaker will ask for new business. Then we move to the daily calendar. The daily calendar is a list of the bills that we're going to vote on, and that's all also on our website. And usually the calendars, at a minimum, are prepared 48 hours in advance, according to the rules that run our chamber. And so before I go to work, or I look at the calendar and see which bills are coming up for a vote, and that's known as the daily calendar. And we have computers on our desk, and we can pull the calendars up. The bills are numbered. There's links from the daily calendar right to the text of the bill, so you can go read about it. Sometimes all the bills are voted on. Sometimes if there's a controversy about a bill on the floor, they may be sent back to committee. Sometimes if there's a controversy on the bill, it could be sent to the end of the calendar so that the sponsors can work out whatever the details are. So there's a couple, and then the bills are either voted up or they're voted down, and for the most part, they're voted down, up.
Okay.
So that's fundamentally how the calendar works.
Okay, thanks. And so I try to pull that out simply because if you look at that glossary, you'll see a lot of terms that might not, in the normal context, have its normal meaning, but they mean something different in the legislative context. And so I thought we should pause and sort of point out an example of that. So Representative Kazarian, we heard about sort of the calendar, but could you take like an individual piece of legislation and how, once it's introduced, like where does it go and how does it get there and then what happens?
Yeah, of course. So legislation, Lauren did a great job kind of running through how the calendar works. Legislative ideas come to us either from constituents, maybe from something we've read, maybe something that we studied during the off season. So you'll submit those in that first part of the session, that first third. And once you submit it to our legislative council, which are the lawyers that are at the State House that work with us to put our ideas into legalese, we'll get a physical paper copy of that bill. We'll read through it, make sure it has everything that we'd like it to have in there. And then, as Lauren mentioned, we'll be running around the room. So if you've ever watched Capitol TV, you probably see us all running around the room with a stack of papers in our hands. We're going around to other legislators and asking them to support our bill ideas. So they'll usually either, read it, maybe it's an idea you've talked to the legislator about already, they'll just sign it, you'll mention what the bill is. And then that person will become a co-sponsor. So the idea of a co-sponsor on a bill is saying that if a bill comes to the floor, I would be supportive of this idea. So that's kind of the difference between sponsoring, that's the person that's championing the bill, versus a co-sponsor, somebody that's saying, I like this idea, I'll support it. Once you get all your signatures on there, and you can get as many as you'd like, we have 75 members. Don't recommend getting 75 signatures. I don't know if you can get 75 signatures on one piece of legislation. You'll see us, we do the new business, we're holding our bills up, it's submitted to the desk, and then it goes into the legal counsel of the speaker, who will decide where the bill should go. Is this a bill pertaining to schools, Rhode Island schools? This will go to the education committee. Is this a bill pertaining to the environment? Go to that committee, and so forth. Now, one tricky thing about bills and hearings is they get scheduled very fast. So you'll submit your bill, you'll be waiting, and all of a sudden you'll see that your bill is scheduled to go in the environment committee, and it's next Monday. So when you're working with advocates, or if you're working with a legislator on a bill, I always say, stick close to them. There's ways to also track bills online, so you can get an email as soon as it's posted. So that way you can work to arrange your time to make sure that you're there to testify in the committee. So committees happen after our session, so around 4 p.m. we start session, and then they'll say committees start at the rise. That's another kind of State House jargon word that just means once our calendar is complete, we all go to our committees. So if somebody says, yeah, we have committee, it's at the rise, it's gonna be after that 4 o'clock time. So I'd say right now it's probably in time like 5 o'clock, maybe 5:30. Once it's in the committee, you'll have your bill heard. And I think our committee process is actually really great. I've had a lot of bills that I thought were great in the off session, I thought were great when I submitted them, and then I get to the committee and you really get to hear not only from your colleagues in the House and from the committee members, but from a lot of advocates too, which is great. I always think about this bill I put in 4 or 5 years ago about banning smoking products from pharmacies from selling smoking products, which I thought was such a no-brainer and such a great bill. Went to committee and I got hammered on it, and I kind of saw the view and the perspective of these small pharmacies who are trying to make ends meet and we're selling these products, and yeah, so it is a really good process. I think it's great to learn, and I think sometimes we get really hard on each other in committee and think it's a bad bill idea, but it's really supposed to be just a collaborative process, and I think it works out well. So after that's over, you have to work with your colleagues, advocate for your bill, and work to try and get it passed out of committee. And then once it's passed out of committee, it'll come to the House floor where all the reps will get to weigh in and vote on it.
Yeah, so, and then if it passes one house, what has to happen?
Great point.
Yep.
We have duplicates of bills. So if I'm going to put in a bill in the House side, I want to find a Senate sponsor to put it in on the Senate side. When there's duplicates of bills, it has a much higher chance of passing because you have somebody in each chamber advocating for that bill. So, if I have a bill idea, I'll go seek a Senate sponsor, somebody that I think is also interested in this work. And then if it passes the House, it gets through committee, it passes the House side. My bill will also have to pass the Senate side, and the senator's bill would also have to pass on the Senate and the House side. Now there is some trickiness with, if there's just one sponsor, it could technically just pass both chambers and be set. But it's good to have a Senate sponsor, and it's good to work the two chambers simultaneously.
Yeah, so you don't have to have 2 different versions of a bill, but it works better politically.
Yeah.
But it's not a requirement of the law or anything. So if you just have one version of a bill and it happens to pass, and the governor signs it, it's a law, even though there was never a companion bill. So one of the things, as an advocate, it can be tricky to track 2 bills, because there's no way to search for the companion bill. So I often lean on sort of whatever advocacy organization might be interested in that bill and try to find out those numbers from them, but that can be tricky.
And what also makes it sometimes tricky is you may have a House version of a bill and also a Senate version, but there's differences in the language in the House and the Senate version. And then that difference has to get reconciled at some point at the end of the game when both chambers are really busy and it's a hectic time. So if you're gonna get a House and Senate version introduced, try your best to make sure that both the House and Senate version have the exact same language, otherwise it's gonna have to get fixed later in the game.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Jed, I'll pick on you now. So as an advocate, how do you, like physically, how do you find the bills that are of interest to you, and how do you keep track of them? Because I know we all sort of have different shortcuts.
Yeah, so I'm probably like most advocates and most professional advocates in that I'm constantly paranoid that some bill is gonna get snuck in and I'm not gonna realize it until it's too late and it becomes law. So I'm really, really diligent. The process that I use, so I think in one of the handouts, there's a reference to the website, right, to the General Assembly website. This is a good website to bookmark on your PC if you're interested in following legislation. And if you click on the legislation link at the top and scroll down to where it says daily introductions, so that's always my starting point. So every day, if you go to daily introductions, you will see for each day what legislation was introduced in the House and what legislation was introduced in the Senate. So for me, since I want to make sure that I don't miss some bill that gets introduced, I make it a point to every day scroll through all the daily introductions and make sure that there wasn't something related to the Bay or the environment that I missed. And part of the reason I do that is because if I just search by the committee or if I just search by an issue, something might slip through the cracks. So for me, that's the most thorough way to make sure that I haven't missed a bill, because sometimes environmental bills, for example, some will get referred to finance, some will get referred to the environment committee, some will get referred to municipal government. So for me, that's the most thorough way to track it. And there's sort of like, so I have one strategy for just keeping an eye on bills that I don't already know about. And then if there's a bill that I'm already familiar with, you can go to, I think where it says bill status and text, bill status text, where you can search by the bill number if you know the bill number. If you know the bill sponsor, you can search by the bill sponsor. If you know the general topic, they do have categories, and it's not really, I think, an exhaustive list, but if you know the general category of the bill, you can search by that. So there are a variety of search parameters that you can use on that website to search for legislation. And then the last thing that I do is rely upon allies in the House and Senate to alert me if they see legislation, because again, it's really hard to know everything that gets introduced, especially this time of year between now and the middle of February. There's a lot of bills getting introduced every day. So you rely upon your friends and allies to keep an eye out as well. So if you have somebody else that can help you keep an eye out for legislation, it's always going to be easier than trying to do it all by yourself.
Yeah, so if you are interested in something and you know the group that works on it, let the professionals do the heavy lifting is the way I look at it. So for instance, the ACLU, they do just a stunning job of updating their website
They follow a
daily
lot of
with
bills.
all the bills. We don't do as much of that. But you know, if whatever interests you, there's probably a group that cares about it, and lean on them. I will caution against the General Assembly website, those categories, like education, environment, those are notoriously bad.
Right.
So if you like, oh, this pull-down menu says these are all the education bills, no, they're not, right? So those are like tags they put on the bills, and they don't do a thorough job of putting the tags on. So never, ever think that if you pull one of those menus down, you've gotten everything.
And the one other thing that I forgot to mention, there's also a feature on the bottom of the main page. It's also on the bottom, I think, if you go to the legislation page, called Bill Tracker.
Yeah.
And once you know a bill number, you can sign up for Bill Tracker. You put in your email address, and you can select bills that you want to track. And you can, you got it?
Yep.
Great. And you can, I think you can set it to notify you daily or weekly or monthly. There's, in case you know, if you don't want to get notified every single day about the status of all the bills. And then the bill tracker will let you know if a bill gets scheduled for hearing at a committee. So that's kind of my way to make sure that for my priority bills, that I don't miss that something got assigned to committee.
Yeah, and there's also another friendly piece of technology. If you're on Twitter, there's a guy named Bill Denon. He's just a computer programmer, And he reached out and said, are there any bots I can build for you? And I said, yeah, build a bot that finds every day those bills are introduced. And so if you follow, it's at the @ RI government bot, B-O-T. It tweets twice a day when the Senate introductions come in and when the House introductions come in. And if you follow a lot of Rhode Island political reporters, you'll notice like minutes after that tweet, they will start tweeting about all the nuggets, all the different bills they found introduced. They're relying on that bot to tell them, oh, the introductions were posted. Because it's not like at 2 o'clock. It happens sometimes in the morning, sometimes it happens in the afternoon. But a lot of people use that bot to keep track of when the bills are introduced. So if you have other ideas for bots that might be useful, I can pass them along. But I'm going to go back to Representative Carson. So the public, assuming people haven't really been up to the State House before and try to observe the process, what are the points at which people can observe?
Well, there's one thing that we neglected to say so far before I answer that question, and that is that every bill is given a number.
Okay.
And so bills that originate in the House start with an H, and then they have 4 digits after them. And then bills that originate in the Senate have an S in front of them, and then they have 4 digits after them. So if you see like H5021, that would be the number of that bill. And we use that coding for tracking the bills all the way through from introduction to possible passage. Now, we also have the capacity to pass resolutions. Resolutions are not statutes. When we pass a bill, and it becomes a state law. When we pass a resolution, it's really just indicative of the sentiment of the chamber. Like, for example, I did a resolution last year recognizing the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters. So that's a resolution. We all voted for that. It's not controversial. It's usually something very positive, and we're recognizing something. Sometimes we even do those immediately right in the chamber. We don't even have to send them through committee. Sometimes we send them through committee. Sometimes we even pass them with a voice vote. So that's another type of an action that we can take in the House. We also take action on weddings because anyone in the state of Rhode Island can perform marriages as long as a resolution is passed to authorize the person to perform a marriage. So if you're getting married and you want your father to perform the ceremony, you contact your legislator and ask them to do a marriage resolution, and that you have to identify who it is, where it is, when it is, and we pass them very routinely. We're very accustomed to passing those very quickly. We also do sort of a recertification of businesses. So if a business falls out of, it loses its status because of some tax problems or some legal problems, but they clean it all up, they can come to us as legislators to reinstate their corporate status. In fact, I have one right now for a business in Newport. And that, again, is not controversial. Those things that we do are required for the Assembly to do in our Constitution. We must do that. We can recertify the corporate status, and we can allocate someone to perform marriages. So those are just a couple little things that we do. But, you know, I'm always frustrated for the public because we meet at night. You know, our committees don't start until 4:30 at least, maybe 5 or 5:30, sometimes as late as 6. You know, people are working. You know, it's dark out now. There were hearings last night. It's cold. Parking is not great. You know, I'm an advocate of trying to bring these hearings to the public. I don't know, I haven't really done anything about trying to make that happen, but I would like to see it more accessible for the public. Right now, in my opinion, it's not that accessible. If you want to come and testify, I think that's great. I would encourage you all to do that. I always encourage people, when I introduce a bill for a constituent, I ask them to come and testify. I mean, I'll do a bill for a constituent, but I need their help. They need to come and help me do this bill. So usually the meeting rooms are not that big. They're open to the public, all the committee hearings, and they come into the room. I suggest they get there about 4 o'clock so they can get a chair, very important. And, you know, I explain to them how the parking works around the building. You gotta feed it with quarters, bring a lot of quarters. And all those committee hearings are open to the public, whether you just want to come and testify or whether you just want to observe, whatever it is that you want to do. The sessions are all open to the public. There's galleries on top. In the House chamber, there's one on each side. They're accessible from the 3rd floor. On the Senate side, there's one viewing gallery that's accessible from the 3rd floor. Anyone's welcome to come to the State House and sit and watch us do this on any day that they want to come in. We do have party caucuses. So, for example, the Democratic members of the House may call a party caucus. And the purpose of a party caucus for us would be to discuss issues, to see what consensus we have on issues that are facing us. They are not open to the public. And sometimes it's publicly announced. We generally meet in the House lounge, which is the room adjacent to our chamber. So that is not open to the public. And there are a series of other types of meetings that take place that are not open to the public. For example, as we approach the end of the session, the committee chairs will meet and as a group with the House leadership to set the priorities for bills coming out of committees. So those meetings are not open to the public either.
So Representative Kazarian, can you talk a little bit about, there's this sort of unique time, though, before you meet as a body as a whole on the floor, people are kind of milling about the floor. And can you talk about sort of people's access to legislators at that point?
Absolutely. So we start session, we said usually around 4 o'clock. But prior to that time, you'll see a lot of legislators coming in. They might have a meeting. They might be putting their stuff down at their desks. And the public is more than welcome to come in and talk to a legislator about an issue, maybe advocate for their cause. I actually have to say, I usually have a lot of advocates come up to me during that time period. I usually say anytime between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, legislator or advocates are coming up to speak to legislators. Once the bell starts ringing, it's kind of like school. There's a bell that rings to tell us that session is going to start soon. You can still be on the House floor, but once the speaker starts gaveling, that's when all the advocates have to leave. The public has to leave the House floor. Only legislators can stay and invited guests and staff, of course. But yeah, that bell is usually a sign that your time is getting cut short, and once he gavels, all the public has to leave.
Yeah, sort of like
I
that.
just want to add to that I have an intern this session, and yesterday was the first day that she came to meet with me, and we started laying out her tasks for the session. College students can enroll, and we actually have an intern office. So if you know a college student that wants to be an intern, they can just contact the intern office. And so anyway, so I put in a request for an intern. She came yesterday, and she was a little bit nervous. And, if you get there about 3:45, there's maybe 20 people in the room. By 10 after 4, there's 300 people in the room. Mm-hmm. The room goes from, real quiet with a few people to, a couple hundred people talking and walking around. She said to me, "My God, this is chaotic." I said, "Yeah, but you kind of get used to it because we don't really work that long. We're only in the chamber for maybe 2 hours a day, and that's not a lot of time to maybe talk to 20 or 30 colleagues about whatever it is you're working on together. So there's a lot of activity between about 4 and 4:15, and it's kind of exciting, and it's kind of you need to get used to it if you're going to work there, and it can be a little intimidating. But once you get used to it, you just realize that that's sort of the way we operate there. But this young woman was a little bit blown away a little bit. I introduced her to Nellie Gorbea. She was like, "My first day," it was kind of fun for her. But I said, "You get used to it, don't worry."
And actually, one thing I would like to add too, when you do come to the State House, when you want to come to the House floor, you want to talk to a legislator, I always recommend, if you have a flyer, anything like that, it's really great to have that information. So you'll talk to me, you'll tell me the key points about the bill you're advocating for, why you're advocating for it, why it's important. I also like when advocates tell me where they're from, especially if you're from East Providence. Let me know, I'd love to hear that. But it's always kind of good to get an idea of who you're talking to, what the issue is, what they care about, and then a flyer so you can take all those ideas home with you and really digest it. So yeah, that's my other thing I'd just add. If you're an advocate, you come to the floor, anything like that's great.
Yeah, and Jed, I'm going to ask you, since you have worked in a different state, so can you contrast this a little to Ohio?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I was just thinking about that. So Rhode Island is unique, and I haven't lobbied in all 50 states, but Rhode Island is unique in that any member of the public, any citizen, assuming you make it past the metal detectors at the front door, can walk onto the floor of either chamber and approach their elected representative and strike up a conversation. Now, in Ohio, for example, I lobbied there for several years, and I never got invited onto the floor. You had to have an invitation from the speaker to be able to go onto the floor before a session. So this is probably a byproduct of having a part-time legislature where maybe you're not there earlier in the day to have meetings with folks, so that's the time to catch people. So it is really nice that you can just walk onto the floor and strike up a conversation with any legislator. The downside to it is that it's not a surefire way to catch the person that you want to talk to, because sometimes not everybody's there, or folks don't show up until right before the gavel is struck. So it's not always the most thorough way. If there's somebody that you absolutely want to talk to, Rep. Kazarian or Rep. Carson, they may or may not be there when you show up. But again, it's a really nice, accessible way to catch people. So I don't rely upon that solely as an advocate, because it is chaotic, it does get loud, it's sometimes difficult to have really meaningful, substantive conversation, especially if it's a complex policy issue and you want to chat nuts and bolts. So what I try to do is have one-on-one meetings as much as possible. I'll reach out to a legislator, I'll either call or email, depending, and try to set up meetings beforehand. Sometimes those meetings take place on the floor when it's quieter, and it's actually a nice place to meet, since not everybody has offices, or at least not nice offices. So there's sort of a variety of ways to reach out to legislators. Some legislators read their email and are very responsive. Others, I don't know if they ever read their emails. And it's also hard to rely upon the phone numbers in that book. So every legislator has a phone number listed, but for some legislators, that it might be their home phone number. Some of them, it's their office number at the State House. Some of them, it's just like the majority leader's office or the speaker's office or the Senate president's office. So the phone numbers are kind of hard to rely on, and slowly but surely I've sort of built my own personalized list of combination of office numbers and cell numbers and home numbers to know the best way to contact different legislators. But that's sort of how I do it.
Yeah, and let me throw it to the legislators and ask, how do you like to be contacted? Like, what's your preferred method for constituents and advocates to reach out? Do you prefer it on the floor? Would you rather meet somebody someplace else?
I like meeting people on the floor. I like getting emails, because email's something I can actually check while I'm at work during my day job. Maybe I shouldn't be telling you that, no, but I like that emails. I think that works really well. I like when people come up to us on the House floor. I think that works really well too. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I also like when people Facebook message me. I have my state rep page on Facebook, and I get a lot of messages from constituents on that. And that's actually really, really quick, easy way, again, for us to just communicate about an issue, or if they want to schedule a time to meet. It's usually kind of a quick way to do it. But.
For me, I really don't have any preference. My constituents can contact me anyway. I try to, I'm one of those members that tries to answer emails as quickly as possible. So if I see them, I answer them right away, to the best of my ability, because I don't want to be perceived as not paying attention to them. Sometimes it's a very easy response. They may ask me to support something in the environment where I'm very strong, and I'll be like, of course I'm with you, contact me anytime. I got an email this morning from a constituent that I know very well, and it was a much more complicated conversation, and so I had to call him. So he needed more high quality information than just I'm with you. So any of those, even when constituents call me and we don't agree, I still listen to them. It's my job. I represent those folks in Newport, and I have to be available to them. I think it's kind of one of the best parts of the job, actually, to talk to people. If you're in this job, you have to really like to talk to people. We're talking to you. This is what it's all about. You're talking all the time. And, you need to really stay in close touch with your constituents. That is the baseline of a perception of doing a good job, that you're really responding to them, and they have access to you, and they're talking to you. People really like that. And I think once we show them that we're personable, that we're real people, and that they can approach us, that's when you really begin to become appreciated and reelected in your district.
So let me ask, I'm going to go back a little bit to process, and then we'll get back into sort of advocacy and how people can get involved. But building off of Jed's point and the contrast between Rhode Island and other states, I'm going to ask Representative Kazarian, you talked a little bit about like who writes bills. Can you share like how many staff members you have and what your office budget is?
I have
Yeah.
0.
We have a part-time admin.
We have part-time admins that also serve 4 or 5 other representatives. But yeah, it's really mostly, we're a part-time legislature, so we all have occupations outside of this. John mentioned I work at Virgin Pulse during the day, so a lot of it is on us, and a lot of it is something we do on our downtime. And I would say that really adds to when you run. It's got to be a labor of love. It's something that you really want to do. You like people. You like to talk about policy and issues. So yeah, we don't have staff, but we do have, I talked about this a little bit, we have the Legislative Council located at the State House, so you don't have to be a lawyer to run, you don't have to write your own legislation. You can go down there with your ideas and talk to a lawyer, have them draft up the legislation for you to then introduce on the floor. But yeah, I know for me it's a one-man show, or maybe 1.5. My admin is great, she's wonderful, but you've got to do a lot of the legwork yourself. But I have to say the advocates are great, and they really help you do a lot of that more in-depth research, really fine-tune your legislation. So part-time legislature, we do have some staff that are there to help us, but it's not like other states. I think Massachusetts, like you get 3 staff people per person. Yeah, right, they're helping
That would be
you.
great.
It's full-time, you have an office. We're a little bit more budget here in Rhode Island, but I think it helps make us a little bit more personable and more like your everyday people, and you're able to catch us, I think, a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of folks don't realize that when you called my number, I'm answering the phone, and they'll be like, "You're Representative Carson?" I'll be like, "Yeah, you just called me." We don't really have a staff budget here. We do also have an assigned press person, and there's a press bureau at the State House, and so there's maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 press people in there that write press releases for us, or op-eds. You see op-eds in the paper by us, or letters to the editor, and they can't do anything political for us with respects to any of our election activity. But I can go to my press person and say, I want to write a letter to the editor about, say, the shooting in Westerly, and I had some opinion on that, and she would write it and exchange it with me, and then they send it out to all the newspapers in the state. So we have the press help, the administrative help directly that work for us, and then this pool of lawyers.
Yeah, so I hope the audience, based on these questions, gets a sense of, it's pretty, the term I use is amateur legislature, part-time, not amateur as sort of pejorative, but like they don't have a lot of resources. And so they rely on advocates, hopefully public interest advocates, but also lobbyists for corporations, depending on the bill, but also the public, right? I've seen, we worked on an open meetings bill 5 or 6 years ago, and it was just some constituents of a state senator who were upset about something. They wrote the bill, they gave it to them, and the bill got passed. And they were just sort of, some angry people from Warwick who wanted their bill passed. And so every year you see, legislation that originated just with citizens with an idea passing. So it's not an impossible task in this state.
If I may say something, I have a bill right now that started with a parent in Woonsocket. I don't represent Woonsocket, but he came to me specifically to do this, and I'm working with he and another person to write a bill around special education. And I mean, the ideas are coming from them, and I'm working with Ledge Council to put them into the protocol, put it into a bill. So what John is saying is absolutely accurate. If you feel strongly about something and you'd like to see something happen, contact your legislator, have a cup of coffee with them, and see if it's possible. And even if the bill doesn't pass, it's good, you can have a hearing on it. I had a constituent ask me once he was a motorcycle guy, and he said in California they have a law where if there's 2 lanes at a stoplight, the motorcycle can go in between the cars, so that when the light turns green, the motorcycle can take off ahead of the cars, which I kind of thought was not really a very safe idea. So I said, all right, I'll put it in. This is what he wanted me to do. And so I said, but you got to come and testify. So I said to him, how will I recognize you at the hearing? He said, oh, you recognize me. And he was a biker, okay? And I was like, you're the guy, right? And so the bill went before the Judiciary Committee and the attorneys mostly attorneys on the Judiciary Committee of the House, and they were like, we're not doing this, but the man had his hearing, and that is really important. I really am so happy this year that I'm working on a few bills that have been motivated and initiated with citizens, because you can do this too. It's really accessible to you. And if you have an interest in this, I would encourage you to become active.
I'll also add to what Lauren said. We're not experts in everything. I would probably not call myself an expert in too many fields. So I really like hearing from advocates. I really like hearing from constituents. I've learned so much from all of the people I've spoken with. Whether I agreed with them at the end or not, it still is just a process of hearing everybody's ideas, learning from all of you, and then for constituents, learning about an issue that maybe something we didn't pick up on or we didn't think affected people enough to put in legislation on our own, and kind of giving them their day at the State House. I will say it is always very funny when you're talking with a constituent, you're emailing with them, you haven't met them personally, and then you're waiting at the hearing room to kind of see
Who they are.
Yeah, that's always a funny dance. But yeah, no, we're not the experts. We want to hear from you guys, and it's always really great to hear from you, whether we agree or not.
So after all that positivity, I'm going to ask a hard question, which is, and we wouldn't be Common Cause unless we asked some hard questions. And
Give them to Jed.
yeah,
Yeah, he said
but,
he wanted all the hard questions.
it's great, and I've seen people just super energized that their bill got a hearing, and they think, oh, that means I'm golden, right? It got a hearing, it's going to get a vote. No, it doesn't mean it's going to get a vote. Like, who makes the decision that your bill gets a vote, and how is that decision made? Yeah.
You want that one?
Yeah.
If you,
I'll tackle.
I'll let you go first.
First of all, you need to have the support of the committee chair. There's a couple different paths to passage, okay? The first path to passage is that it's something that just makes a whole lot of sense and there's no controversy over it, and it's just going to go through the first year. It's just something like, we love dogs kind of thing, and it's something real simple and everybody can vote yes. And there's very few stakeholders involved up and down, and there's no real debate about it. So some bills take a couple years to pass. Like the first year maybe is just airing the issue. That's not uncommon. Like with this bill I have on special ed this year, I'm really upping the ante and writing a very strong bill. I don't expect it to pass. And so what I am expecting is that the advocates will come and they'll get their day, and they'll be able to come and testify, which is what I'm setting up for them. And we'll see what happens to that bill. It may get traction, it may not get traction. So how does it get traction? Well, first off, you have to have the support of the committee chair. The committee chair is directly communicating to the House leadership, and that's the Speaker and the Majority Leader, and he or she is telling them what's going on in the committees, what bills are being heard. They're watching that very closely. So if you can get the support of the committee chair, you're a little bit closer. If it's a very controversial bill and there really are opposing views on each side, the leadership of the chamber may not be inclined to take it up on the first go-round. Or maybe they're being influenced by people, because lobbyists can really influence all across the chain. I mean, they can influence me as a legislator, they can influence committee chairs, and then they can influence the leadership of the House. So there's a lot of cross kind of discussion going on. It's not just the committee hearing. I mean, if the bill gets an overwhelming committee hearing and nobody's opposed to it, then you have a good argument. You can say, look, my bill, there was nobody opposed to it, and those are the ones that have a much easier shot of going through. Now, I'm sure we all read in the paper that a lot of people believe that the Speaker of the House has a lot of power, and it's true. By the nature of the culture there, and by the nature of the rules that govern the House, the Speaker of the House does really have a lot of authority in the chamber, and does have the final say, actually, for thumbs up and thumbs down on many bills. But there is a lot of other discussion that's going on amongst all of those players in the room. It's not an exact science. Each bill has its own path, and sometimes it takes several years for a bill to pass. Sometimes it passes the first year. So it depends on who your co-sponsors are. It's a very strategic formula for passing bills. Sometimes it depends on who your co-sponsors are. Sometimes it depends on how strong the stakeholders come out and testify for it. Sometimes it depends on how much opposition there is. Now, let's take, for example, the choice bill that passed last year. I mean, that bill had been introduced for 20 years to codify Roe v. Wade in Rhode Island. And last year, I think what really put that bill over the top was that there were people every single day lobbying us. Like every single day, there'd be 100 people in the room. And sometimes I think the only reason we passed that bill was because we had to get rid of these 100 people in the room. I'm serious about this, because they would be there every single day yelling and singing and lobbying us, and it was just like bogging us down. You know, so lobbying does work. It does work. So there's different strategic paths to passage, and it depends upon the way the bill is written and the way the strategy unfolds by the sponsor.
I'll add to that too. I think kind of to what Lauren said, a lot of times bills need a lot of work, or sometimes legislators are putting in bills either to satisfy a constituent that wants to have their day and have a hearing, talk about an issue. Sometimes we put in bills to bring light to a certain issue. Other times we have our passion projects that we bring, but that they're really not fully formulated yet. They have a few years of work ahead of them. First bill I ever put in was a bill for social workers, school social workers specifically, creating a ratio between students and social workers throughout the state. I'll never forget, I got hammered by Brian Newberry, the minority leader at the time, about this bill. We didn't have any data, we didn't have any of this. We worked year after year to bring more people to the hearing. Finally, we're able to talk to the chairman a little bit more about this bill. What can we do to make it work? And we were able to get a study commission, or a report actually by the Rhode Island Department of Education, to really get some more data behind why this bill would be a good idea. So now I'm in my 8th year as a legislator. We just got that report back, hoping that will help give some teeth to legislation. And again, maybe it's something that we would mold, it would evolve. So I always say the hearing process, the committee process is great. It's really a good time for all these people that care about this issue to come together, talk about this legislation, talk after the hearing to what would make this bill better, what would make it passable, and it can take years to get things passed. I want to just also, this might be one of your questions too, but there's a phrase you'll hear at the beginning of every hearing they go through. It's holding bills for further study. And I know this phrase has gotten a lot of heat over the years, and sometimes I think it deserves it, sometimes I don't think it does. And I think it doesn't because it's really that in that committee process, the first time everybody's going to be hearing about this bill, I think it's good to give everybody a chance to really think about it, give advocates and legislators time to talk about it, and maybe mold the bill, get it in a passable position for the year in front of us, or to continue to work on it together for the years to come. So I think that phrase is actually
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question, and that's the title of the panel, right? I'm just a bill held for further study. So, so there's a parliamentary reason
Yes, there is.
they do it at the beginning of the hearing. It's essentially tabling the bill, meaning the bill won't get a up or down vote at that meeting or that hearing. But it's also in case the committee loses a quorum. And so they can continue to hear testimony from the public, even though there's still not a quorum of the committee sitting there. And can you talk a little bit about there's a juggling act up there because you might sit on multiple committees, and why, I think there are good reasons they lose quorums, because people sit on multiple committees. There are bad reasons because people go to fundraisers at hotel bars instead of listening to the public giving testimony. But can you explain sort of what it's like to sit on more than one committee that might meet on the same night?
You want to take that one?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I've been on committees that met at the same time of day and everything, and it is really hard. You got to run back and forth. You want to make sure you're recorded as present. Then when they say hold for further study, you've got to make sure you're hearing the bills that you can hear, going back and forth between both of them. I've also had a third juggling act once where I had two committees that I had to sit on, and I had to go to another committee to testify on a bill. So sometimes you're going to see legislators kind of filing in and out. I've been on Corporations Committee, for example, for 8 years, so some of the bills I've heard multiple times. So if there was another committee hearing I had to run to, I could go listen to that. Sometimes too, there'll be a hot button issue that we want to go and listen to on a committee. So you might see legislators kind of jumping out to that committee, and then maybe they don't sit on it, but they're standing in the back of the room, and then jumping back into their committee. So that, I'd say, is usually the reason why people are moving around. There are other more nefarious reasons for why people might be jumping around, but I won't really get into those. But usually, I'd say 99% of the time, people are just trying to get to all those committees, and I think that lends itself to us being that part-time legislature.
Absolutely.
And, the other thing too, actually, I'll put is meetings. Sometimes I'll have a meeting with an advocate, and the only time they can meet is when I have committee. So, people are always kind of jumping and juggling around that building, and I think it lends itself to being part-time.
The part-time legislature is really difficult because we really have to conduct a lot of business in 2 hours. I think that when the history of the legislature, which I don't really know much about, there was a good reason to have it be part-time. But if you look at other states, some of them are full-time based on the level of activity. We introduce about 2,000 bills a session in the House. That's a lot of bills, and we hear every one just about. And sometimes you don't hear it, the sponsor may pull it back and decide not to have a hearing. But that's a lot of work to do on 3 days a week. We meet for about 100 days. I mean, that's basically it for a couple hours. Some of us off the record and in casual conversations say, wouldn't it be great if we were full-time, and we went longer. We might be able to not have that pressure on us that we do, particularly in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And we might be more effective if we had more time. So I would be an advocate of exploring that. In discussions with other members of the House, there's a feeling that the public might not be tolerant of a full-time legislature. There's a feeling that it's going to cost more money, and there might be criticism. We don't get things done. What are we doing? Sort of the naysayers out there. And that's part of the reason that one of the reasons that we never really debate that. But I think that if the public knew the amount of work that we do, and the reasons that we don't get to everything as thoroughly as you might like, is because we really don't have enough time to get it done, or staff. That's really the bottom line.
Yeah, so how much money do you make?
We make a whopping $16,000 a year, compared to Massachusetts, which I think is about $150,000 a year.
And I'll
Yeah.
say, John, as somebody who's lobbied in states with a part-time legislature, and I've lobbied in states with a full-time legislature, my personal opinion is that you get better legislation passed, you get better, more thorough, more thoughtful laws passed in states that have a full-time legislature. That's just the reality of the matter. You have more time, you have the luxury of more time and more staff to more thoroughly research issues. And frankly, I think that there are bills that become law here that probably should not have become law, not because I personally disagree with the content, because they're just not well researched, they're rushed in at the last minute. And that has an impact on people across the state as a result. So.
I just wanted to add that we make a little over $16,000. We do get travel reimbursement from our House on the days that we are in session. We get a check, the middle of each month. And then we also get health insurance, and most of us, we're encouraged to make a contribution towards that, and most of us make some contributions toward that. For me, it comes to be about $30,000 a year, completely.
I just want to add, I agree that I think there would be a lot of good that would come out of being a full-time legislator. But then sometimes I feel like it's also good that we're part-time. Working in the tech industry in Rhode Island, I feel like I get to hear a lot of, or kind of be on the ground floor about a lot of issues that I otherwise wouldn't know about. Something I work with a lot of other fellow millennials, and just hearing about student loan debt, housing prices, these are things I hear about with my friends and other states and in the state, but there's something about being in that kind of environment and being in that corporate world, and then also going to the state house, that I think helps me shape my policy and my position on certain bills. So I'd say it's a double-edged sword. I think there would be a lot of good reasons to go full-time. I also think there's a lot of benefits to being part-time. I just wanted to highlight kind of the reasons I think it might be good to be part-time, but.
Yeah, and we don't have a position on it, but I will say, just anecdotally, yesterday, when they're done on the floor, they open the doors and all the lobbyists rush in. And I was trying to rush in to grab them to remind them about tonight. And Representative Place was walking out, and he had like his work uniform on. Yeah, and he works, I think, in some manufacturing business, and it was just his, his name and, the logo of and you're just kind of like, yeah, I mean, he came from work, he came from the factory, was a legislator, and something kind of cool about that. that said, and it makes it more accessible to blue-collar folks, but on the other hand, you don't have the time to devote to the issues that,
But it also limits the kind of people that can
That's exactly
run
right.
as state
Yes.
legislators too,
Yes.
because
Yep.
you gotta be able to leave work at 3 or 3:30.
And
You have
afford
to
it.
have some
You can afford
it.
flexibility and be able to afford that. So it does, restrict the pool of people that could realistically run.
absolutely.
Also, sometimes there'll be an event at 10:30 in the morning. I would love to go to an event at 10:30 in the morning. My boss will not let me.
Yeah.
And I don't blame her. But, that's tough too.
So before and I want to get to questions in a second, but I do want to touch on a couple practical things about going up there. And we've hinted at it a little bit, and I'm going to pick on Jed here. But can you walk me through what it's like? So say you've found on the website, you've identified the bill, you've signed up for the tracker, and you get the email and it says, Tuesday at the Rise, House environment. What do you do to make sure you kind of get in the building, get signed up for that bill, know where you're going, and are able to testify? And then once you sit down, kind of walk us through what that testimony might look like briefly.
Okay, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
It's gonna depend on the specific legislation and whether or not it's a priority bill. We testify on a lot of bills. Some of those are really, top priorities for Save the Bay, and others are maybe lesser priorities. But once so usually in the previous week, on Wednesday or Thursday, they'll post the committee calendars for the following week. I look at those and I see, okay, what's on the agenda for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and House Environment, Senate Environment, and I decide, which bills are we going to testify on. I try to prepare testimony and talking points a couple days in advance so that I have some time to, kind of think about it and think about in my head what I'm going to say when I get in there, because I don't like to read testimony. Committee chairs do not want you to read testimony, which makes it a little bit challenging, especially if you're up there for the first time and you've never testified at a hearing before. It can be a little nerve-wracking. Like, it's nice to have something you can look at and read, but my advice is to try not to actually read your testimony. So I figure out what time the hearing is going to be. Usually the hearings start at the Rise. Every now and again there's a hearing that starts at like 3 o'clock or 3:30. Sometimes they'll have them where they'll schedule them to start like later in the night. But I usually get there plenty early. I try to be one of the first people to sign up on the sign-up sheet. So once you know where the hearing's taking place, and that'll be on the committee calendar, 209, 312, whatever the room number is. The single-digit numbers are down in the basement, and sometimes it's tricky to find the rooms down there. Once I know where the room's going to be, I'll show up as early as I can. And write my name down, because they'll call people up in order. Usually they'll take testimony from legislators first. So if there's a legislator that wants to testify on a bill, they'll allow them to testify first. And then they just go through first come, first serve. And I always try to get early, because sometimes the hearings will go kind of long. In the Environment Committee, for example, on any given day, they might have 5 or 6 or 12 different bills that they're hearing testimony on. And outside of the committee room, they do it the old-fashioned way. There's a sign-up sheet, and they tape them or tack them to the wall. I find the bills that I want to testify on. I sign my name in. There's usually, I think, a place for your organization, and then there's little boxes for like opposed, or pro, con, neutral. Do you have written testimony? Do you want to testify? So I'll sort of indicate what my preference is. Sometimes I may just sign in and say pro, just so we're sort of on the record as supporting a piece of legislation. Sometimes I might hand in written testimony, but not really feel the need to get up and talk about it. And then I try to get a good seat so I can see the people that I want to see, and bring reading material, because sometimes the committee hearings can go pretty long. Sometimes you're up there until 10, 11 o'clock at night, and you don't always know how long it's going to be, because you don't always know how many other people are going to show up to testify on a bill. So that's sort of how I approach it in a nutshell, and I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to give people sort of a mental picture of what this is like. And it's not very automated. You know, you're filling out your name on a sign-up sheet. And a couple of things I want to pick out there. You don't have to have a position, right? So just because there's a box, you don't have to check it. And you don't have to testify. And for people who are going up the first time, actually, if you know that you're really interested about something, actually go up the week before and just go into a hearing and just watch it.
Get a feel for it.
Yeah, maybe it's interesting, maybe it's not, but you'll learn a lot just about sort of how the flow of the meeting happens, and I think it'll put you at ease. Like I can say, I didn't do this work before I started this job, and man, my heart was pumping the first time, like I had to go testify. And I should have like gone up the week before and figured out where to sit and where the bathrooms were and everything. And I didn't. Instead, I was on the hot seat the first night. And I think an important point is if you watch on Capitol TV, which is really excellent, you know, they're going to ask a lot of questions of some people. Generally speaking, if you're not a professional advocate, they're going to treat you with kid gloves. They're going to go after me, and they're going to go after Jed. They're really going to go after me sometimes. But they're not necessarily, if you're just a person off the street there to kind of pour your heart out on your bill, they're not going to be aggressive. Once in a while, you'll get, you know, rare case of a legislator sort of mad about something, but you said, but generally speaking, they're going to save the substantive questions for the professional advocates and have the general public, you know, they're going to thank you for coming up. And I'll pick one last thing out is they really don't like you to read.
Yeah, there's that, and also try to keep your comments concise. I mean, they don't want you to get up there and do a 12-minute speech about God knows what, because that's just going to irritate them, and you're probably not going to score any points. So.
Yeah, especially those nights where they're hearing repetitious stuff. So, you know, on any hot button issue, there might be 100 people signed up, and they don't want to hear 100 people say the same thing. In the same way, you probably don't want to get 100 identical emails that were robo-created.
Sorry
Because
about
it's
that.
less, yeah, I know, sorry. You're going to get some in the next 6 months, so I apologize. But, you know, the more personal you can make it, you know, I always tell people, if you have a personal anecdote that is the reason you support the bill, use that personal anecdote, right? I even do that sometimes for our bills if I have something personal.
I wanted to just add something about the committee hearings. We generally cluster bills of the same subject on the same night. So for example, if we're hearing bills on plastic waste in the Environment Committee, chances are there'll be 10 plastic waste bills. You know, there's not going to be one on this and one on that. It does happen, but the staff to the committees and the chairs try to cluster topics so that when stakeholders come or advocates come, they're hearing a whole bunch of bills that they're interested in. Now, then there are the nights that we hear the highly controversial bills, which John alluded to, like when we hear the gun bills. So like it'll be gun bill night, and that means that they're going to be there all night, and that's all they're hearing. And there's 500 people in the building, you know. So they, in the scheduling, they try to accommodate, you know, the public, in terms of enabling them to just make 1 or 2 trips up there for the types of bills they're interested in, and make it easier on us too when the schedules are set on the bills.
Yeah.
So if you go on a bill, you might hear other stuff. You're following, say, a plastic waste bill like banning straws. You may even hear banning styrofoam as well, or you may hear ban the bag that same night. It'll be a whole bunch of stuff that maybe will be interesting to you.
Yeah, and there'll be grab bag nights, right?
Yeah,
so
there are.
You'll have a bill, and there'll be nothing else on the agenda like that bill. And my favorite night was, I don't even remember what my bill was, but apparently there's some law that says if you drop something off at an art museum in Rhode Island, they can't just throw it away. They have to, and they can't just, and so evidently when they clean out Grandpa's garage, RISD gets a lot of the crap. The people are like, oh, my grandfather was an artist. And they bring all the art, right? And RISD has storage of all this stuff, and they want relief. And so the poor person from RISD was up there testifying like, you have no idea how much stuff we have in storage that costs us money, and it's not really the kind of art we're going to have at this beautiful museum. I don't know if that bill ever passed, but I'll never forget the poor RISD person, really didn't kind of know her way around the building, and she's like, this is a really good idea, and I'm not sure it was going to go that year. But I want to, unless there's any burning things, open it up. If you have a question, I'll repeat it back so we get it into the microphone, but does anybody have any burning questions? Topics we didn't cover? Yes.
What would it take for a bill to pass like in September? Because, you know, I'm studying a bill that was passed, but it passed in September. So, I mean, what does it take, you know, for a bill to get carried past the session, it didn't make it past committee, and onto the floor, and then all of a sudden September comes and they approve it?
Yeah, so I'll just repeat it so it's in the recording. So what would it take for a bill to pass in September?
Well, for a bill, we only meet between January and June, and for a bill to pass in September, that means there was a special session called. And special sessions are very rare, you know, maybe once every 10 years. There was a special session, I guess, in 2017 in the fall. I was actually, had planned a European trip, and I was away, and my bills were coming up while I was away, so I know, and there was a series of bills that passed that second and third week of September, so I know what you're talking about. That was very unusual that would happen. So I think we were called back to deal with some very specific bills that couldn't wait, and while that was happening, we also passed some other bills that were very close to the finish line and made it the way over. So
Yeah.
that's a very unusual case.
Yeah, there was a budget impasse.
Oh, that was it, it was the budget impasse.
Yeah,
That's
the
correct.
Senate refused to do the
That's
House
correct.
budget.
That was
and
very
then
unusual.
They came back. I had a bill passed that September.
Yeah,
so
it passed while I was away, which was
Yeah.
good. In fact, I think I had two pass while I was away.
There's another example in my time, which is 2011. They came in to do pension reform, and
Right,
they did a
that's
special
right.
session.
That was in
but
October, yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very rare.
Maybe every 7 or 8 years it happens
So.
for unique circumstances.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Suppose your own legislator, House or Senate, is a supportive person of a particular measure that you'd like to get passed. You've won her heart somehow, perhaps with friends and allies. Can you go on beyond and do anything efficacious dealing with committee chairs and so forth when you're not a constituent?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what can somebody do if your legislator supports the bill you care about? What can you do that's efficacious for other legislators?
We get letters from everybody in the state, from all across the state. You are welcome to contact any one of us. Committee chairs would be very accustomed to hearing from the public about bills because they're responsible for every bill. I would encourage you to contact the Speaker's office if there was something you wanted him to know about. I mean, we're very used to, we get bills from everybody in the state. I mean, letters. It's not, personally, I pay much more attention to the ones that come from my district. But we do, go for it, basically.
But I would say that if your legislator is supportive of a piece of legislation, the most effective thing would be to have your legislator go to the committee chair and lobby on your behalf, because they're gonna be more effective, probably.
I have had an instance where I was actually working with some constituents on a bill. I was actually a co-sponsor on the bill. The lead sponsor was a great advocate on the issue, and we all were able to kind of collaborate and work together. But I did have them send a joint letter to the committee chair, and he really appreciated that, and that I think helped get the bill kind of through. So I would definitely say, you know, if you're respectful, you reach out to the committee chair. They like to hear from everybody. So.
And one thing I've heard is that as you get toward the end of the session, the leadership might ask you sort of what your priorities are, because many people introduce far more bills than it could pass. And that sometimes my ask of my sponsor is make this one of your asks of the leadership, one of your top 3. And if you get enough legislators to sort of say, yeah, this is a priority, that is enough of a tipping point to get it over the line. But that's a great question. Yes, ma'am.
So if your legislator is not likely to be supportive of your ask, how do you kind of reach out and find somebody who might be willing to talk about a bill? You're talking about the one you're working on for the fellow from Woonsocket. And again, it can be the kind of issue that it may be a community-based issue that there's going to be divisive
Yeah, so what do you do if your legislator is not necessarily sympathetic to your ask?
Well,
That's a hard one.
generally speaking, our constituents know what we do and do not support. So the public generally understands my values. So, and they elected me, so we probably share most of the values. So it'd be kind of unusual for somebody to come to me with something that I would just never support, you know. And the advocates know that. It's like, why should I go to her? She's never gonna work on it. I mean, she supports ABC and we want DEF, and we know she's opposed to DEF, so they don't even waste their time, because the advocates are going to find those sponsors that are gonna really push their bill. So that's not likely to happen that much. I think that if a bill came to me, if a bill's gonna pass, it's gotta have a very proactive sponsor, right? So there was a situation today with the bill where my Senate colleague wanted me to do a bill, and there's really another person in the room that would do a much better job on it, and I support it. But I was frank with her. I said, you should really go to her because she's got experience in this. You know, so you may give the bill to another person in the room who is known for that issue or has expertise in it. So again, it depends upon the strategy for the bill. You know, when I had that bill around the motorcycle driver, I didn't really have to do anything because the Judiciary Committee looked at him and said, we're not doing this. I mean, you know, I thought it was kind of a crazy idea and not safe. But he wanted it, and I testified, and I said, you know, this is what he wants. But, you know, the committee process took care of that all by itself. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I guess the real question is, most of us don't follow this day by day. So again, like the example with the school. So there was the one that was across from St. Pat's, and then there was the new Mexican one, which opened on the east side and is across from the French American school. And so same issue, two different neighborhoods, two different communities. So, you know, and I know that restaurant sat empty for a year and a half over the liquor license delay. So again, I'm kind of trying to pursue, so I'm not an expert at this. I wanna weigh in on something. How do you figure out who the expert in the room is?
Oh, you want?
Yeah, you know, so one other thing that you could try on a very local issue like that is to go to your city and town council folks.
Yeah.
Because if you have an ally there, they might be able to help you find somebody at the legislature because your city and town council folks work with them a little bit more. So that would be one approach, kind of an end around.
Yeah, I've had constituents, talk to me about bill ideas. Maybe sometimes it's an opinion we don't share, and it's always good to have those conversations. But if, they're coming to me about a bill idea, similar to what Representative Carson said, I'll try to find somebody else in the room that I know champions this issue. It's actually happened to me before, too. I talked a little bit about a social worker bill I'm working on. I've had people bring social workers from their district to talk to me about issues. So we try to kind of collaborate and put people in touch with the right people. Very Rhode Island, But yeah, I guess another suggestion I'd give to you is if your legislator doesn't agree with your opinion on something, maybe find another legislator from that same city or town. So for Providence, find somebody else in Providence, East Providence, try to direct them somewhere else.
If it's a local issue, municipal
Yeah.
issue like that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do one last question. Thanks.
When would be a good time to present if you have like a petition and a list of signatures?
Oh yeah, when's a good time to do petitions?
I'd say anytime.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I will say the time not to do it is while the bell is ringing, it's the last day of session, and we're just about to vote on it. I've had that happen to me before. Somebody will run up to me and tell me, we hate this bill, and there's like a crew of us that hate it. Say, well, I wish I had heard from you when we had the committee hearing. I wish I had heard from you any other time before today, an hour before voting on it. So yeah, that's what I would say. Anytime is good except for at that moment.
I would say the earlier the better, and I
Yeah.
would say come and testify and show the committee chair that you have these petitions, and then maybe give them a copy or give a copy to your legislator. The earlier in the session, the better. Remember,
Yeah.
we spend the first quarter, first trimester really focusing on getting the content down. And then in the second part of the session, we're in the hearing process. So by the time we get to the third quarter, the third trimester, I would think that that's too late at that point. You want to, because you want to be in the game all along, because for me to pass a bill, I may have to talk to Katie, because she has a concern, and then I got to talk to this person and that. So it's like a stew we're making, right? So the earlier you get your stuff in the stew, the more likely you can have impact.
Great question.
Yeah, all great questions, and I know I can stick around for a little bit if people have other questions. I don't know if you can stick around for a few minutes if there's any lingering questions. And so I want to thank the panelists for their insights. And thank all you for coming out on a Thursday night. Thanks Steve Elquist for coming and covering this, as he always does. He is amazing at that. I'm just going to, two more things, make a pitch for our redistricting effort. So we're going to have an event and it's on the sheet you got when you came in on February 5th at the State Library at 3:30 in the afternoon. So if you can, or 3 o'clock, if you can come then, you'll hear all about redistricting and what we want to do to reform it, and that's coming up next year. And then finally, like if you enjoyed this and would like more of this program, you need a healthy Common Cause. So if you aren't already a member and you want to become a member of Common Cause, you can go to our website at commoncauseri.org and help us maintain a healthy organization. But again, thank you very much. Hope to see you at a future event. And thank you to the panelists.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Yeah.